Our speaker today is Paul Allin, a visiting professor at the Department of Mathematics at Imperial College London, and as Ian said, a founding member of the International Development Section. He served there for 7 years. But more to the point for today's talk, Paul was the first director of the Measuring National Wellbeing Programme at the UK Office for National Statistics. I'm sure you'll have questions for Paul. Please use the chat function at the side of your screen, and I'll try and organise the questions into some sensible way to put to Paul at the end of his talk. Could I also remind you, please, to switch off put your microphones on mute. If you could put your cameras off, it saves the bandwidth and it makes the talk less distracting. So, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm just trying to share my screen, and then we should be off and running, I hope. There we are. I hope everybody can see those slides. And thank you, Ian, and thank you, Phil, and to the committee for this opportunity to talk about a new book. So, quick plug: this is about a new book, but I hope you find the ideas interesting and challenging. And it's also a great opportunity to thank colleagues in the International Development Section, because I've gained many insights and leads and information from you, particularly about the Sustainable Development Goals and indicators, but many other things as well. I guess like everybody here, David Hand and I have long been interested in official statistics and the role of official statistics in particular. To borrow something that's rightly said about Florence Nightingale, who was a passionate statistician, we're passionate about official statistics. And part of that is that we believe that official statistics should play an even bigger role than they do in society at the moment. And so we set about thinking about this, and it resulted in a book in trying to kind of understand really why official statistics don't actually play the huge role that we think they could. And to do that, we really wanted to find out what's known about how and why official statistics are used. And not to stop you buying the book, but the message on that is actually not very much is known about how they're used and why they're used. But there's a lot that we can learn about more general issues and really making greater use of the role of official statistics. We wanted the book to be grounded in a very real application, and that's what's more important than kind of going beyond GDP, the Sustainable Development Goals. We called all of that kind of from GDP to Sustainable Wellbeing, because it's not just the Sustainable Development Goals, but they're very much at the heart of this. And that in turn took us into kind of the policy world. The book is part of a series about well-being in politics and policy. And as we were finishing the book, COVID struck, as Ian's already mentioned. On one of the many things that came out of that was a reigniting of the beyond GDP agenda in the form of kind of building back better. It also put a spotlight on the role of official statistics. You may have seen that the UK ONS has produced 150 new products relating to COVID and related issues. But even so, those statistics are competing with other official figures and figures from other sources. You won't need the vision that there is for official statistics, but it is just worth pausing on that for a second, just to look briefly at the fine words and the fine phrases that appear in the United Nations fundamental principles. I've highlighted some of them on this slide: serving the government, economy and the public with data about absolutely everything you could think about, the test of practical utility. And actually, each time I read this vision, I kind of pick up other angles to this. And the final two words in this paragraph about entitlement to public information, we'll see later on how this has given rise to a wider conceptualization about official statistics and how they might become public statistics, public information in the broader sense. Again, everybody, I'm sure, is well aware of kind of exactly how official statistics are delivered. This is a sort of summary of some of the key things you need to be able to do that. We don't need to dwell on this kind of line by line. There needs to be some sort of basis of this. Might just pause over the kind of the second point here, that official statistics are simply the statistics produced by official bodies, and sometimes people find that a bit strange. You need to read that in a sense with other lines here, that there's a code of practice around this, and that information can be shared to produce these non-disclosive statistics. So on the one hand, it's a sort of almost a self-defining definition, but on the other hand, there's a lot bound up in that. And that gives rise to a huge volume of official statistics. We found that we estimated that there are 3,570 releases of official statistics a year in the UK at the time we were writing the book. And there are more now, as I mentioned, with the COVID publications. Here's just a taster. I happened to be giving a talk at Imperial College earlier in the year, and I just thought I'd look at just what was produced, what was published on the previous day, and there were 47 statistical releases across UK official statistics, ranging across these topics, as you can see listed here. I think 2 points to make about kind of the set of official statistics. In a sense, the first one is that it's not a prescriptive list. You won't find somewhere written down the set of things that should be official statistics and the set of things that aren't. I noticed in the paper the other day, for example, in newspaper the other day, that Statistics Sweden publishes opinion polls, including on support for the government, which I'm not sure many other national statistics offices do. And the second point to make is that actually not all official figures are official statistics. Now that may be clear to people who know about official statistics and people who work in official statistics. But we found out really that for many people, this is a difference without a distinction. Looked at from outside, what's the difference between a set of figures and a set of statistics? And there are many different sources here. Again, in the newspaper recently, there's a report of some work where researchers at University College London had analysed, quotes, official data on stop and search. And those are data that came from police forces. They would seem to look like official statistics, but of course they're technically not. If we look at official statistics briefly as a production process, because that's how we really understand it best, it's defined by the organisations. The set of official statistics are defined by the organisations that produce them, and it very much gives the idea of a production process leading to regular or occasional publications. And then the final point, most of those are reported by the news media, particularly for the regularly reported outputs. So, in a sense, I hope this kind of chimes with your understanding of how officials, and there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, this is the way that they're produced, but I think it would also lead us on to think about, well, how can we develop that and build on that? And just to slip in a reference from the Parliamentary Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee report on official statistics of last year, that those producing official statistics do not understand all of today's users and potential users of statistics and how statistics are used, because that very much fits with things that we read and found and picked up elsewhere. And generally the culture of official statistics is that, in a sense, that of a producer. Yes, as Walter Rademacher has said, it's a result of an evolution. Nobody's saying that official statistics have stayed the same, but it's in terms of who produces them, what they produce and how they produce them. Okay, it's influenced by political events, scientific progress and the appearance of new data sources, but I think you can't help escape the conclusion that official statistics, we know what we know about official statistics, we know most about who produces them, what they produce and how they produce them, but we know much less on why they produce and for whom are they produced. And I think this matters because you'll all be aware of the so-called kind of information space, an increasingly crowded official information space. And it is that official statistics are definitely in competition with, they're competing with other providers of statistics, sometimes using official data or official statistics, research, citizen use of open data increasingly, commentators, post-truth, alternative factual, we're aware of all of these things. Just an example I spotted in The Economist earlier this year, that Google constantly estimates how busy places are relatively to historical averages by tracking mobile phone usage. So kind of new data sources coming along all the time and grabbing the headlines. Well, we do know a bit about how official statistics are used, but and this is based on the Office for Statistics Regulations, many assessments of official statistics. We've added a few to these from our own understanding and reading and discussions. But you'll see they're all very broad uses. I mean, it's very difficult to kind of pin down and point to a place where official statistics were used in exactly that way, in exactly that for that reason. Yes, of course, there are. I mean, if you read the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, you will see that the data that they've used. So there's kind of, one's well aware that official statistics are used and used very widely, but how they're used and why they're used, we get these very, very broad descriptions. So let's move on to GDP, because that features in the title. Is GDP as well known as Maradona? Well, here is the front page of a Guardian newspaper of a few days ago. GDP is a key aggregate, as I'm sure you're aware, within the system of national accounts. It's described as the most frequently quoted indicator of economic performance. And here it is sharing the front page of a newspaper with the news of the death of a football hero, Maradona. You won't be able to read the detail of the lower part of the screen, but let me just briefly mention it. It shows in the chart, which runs along the bottom of the page, the year-on-year change in GDP for each of 320 years from 1700 onwards. The system of national accounts was only really formalised very much towards the end of that period in the 1940s, but economists have gone back and estimated what GDP would have been back through the Great Frost, the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the World War I slump, through to the aftermath of World War II and the present COVID pandemic. Year on year, in the large majority of years, GDP has been positive. So economic growth has been, as measured, has been reported roughly for those years of growth around about 5% per annum. But for 1 year in 4, and they're not evenly distributed. These are the red lines going down at the bottom. For 1 year in 4 on average, GDP has declined, and you'll see in some cases it's declined very, very markedly. So I think we're familiar with kind of seeing GDP, but many people, in a sense, won't actually understand what GDP is, and in a sense don't begin to understand that. And to factor in some research that has then just been published on the public understanding of economics and economic statistics, very pertinent research by the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence, hosted at NISA. Their report shows that people's familiarity with and knowledge about GDP is very limited. Quote, they conclude that people have seen it mentioned on the news, as here, but they tend to see it as an example of economic jargon, inaccessible to them, an example of something which is not directly relevant to their everyday lives. And the ESCO researchers kind of concluded that really this contributed to a picture that there's a kind of parallel popular view of economics, which actually sits alongside, in a sense, what economists and national accountants see as the economy and all the concepts and definitions that they embed in that. This research was conducted ahead of COVID and the recession, and clearly GDP has got more of a focus then, in the sense of kind of building back and going beyond where we were at the time. I think if we're looking at kind of going from GDP to sustainable well-being, this has been happening for a long time. Again, as I'm sure you're well aware, GDP was never designed as a measure of progress. It's a measure of economic performance, economic activity, and very precisely defined in that way. So really in the kind of 1940s and 50s, it was sort of muttered that these things aren't wider measures of progress. It took Robert Kennedy in the 60s and others to make those very famous quotes about why GDP is not a measure of the things that are really important. The beyond GDP as a kind of phrase was kind of formalized in a EU program early in this century, 21st century. But there's also kind of been much interest in green growth, and then since 2015 we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which kind of are nowadays, very current, the idea of resetting how we live our lives, building back better, etc., etc. These, in a sense, are aspirations, not statistical measures. But new statistics, new indicators, indices are invariably associated with those, as indeed GDP is. GDP is not only a concept, but it's an indicator. This is a quote from the United Nations agenda, which set out the Sustainable Development Goals. Indicators are being developed, as everybody knows, to assist this work. These are the attributes they have to have. The data is key to decision making. What decision making is not quite clear. And we are committed to developing broader measures of progress to complement gross domestic product. So again, the restatement that we're going to go beyond GDP in some time. You'll be aware that this is a huge challenge to have these particular set of indicators. We in our book we briefly review the then position of the indicators in the UK, where in early 2020 it was reported that the UK is still exploring data sources for about 1 in 4, 23% of the 244 indicators that support the Sustainable Development Goals. And in many other countries, including lower and middle income countries, the challenge is even greater. And as we read it, the purpose of having these indicators is to help measure progress towards the goals. Some people say we should go further to, in a sense, help the UK understand its performance on the Sustainable Development Goals by openly disclosing progress towards the targets. But I think we would argue, David Hand and I would argue, that actually what we want to do is actually use these data, use these indicators to actually help us achieve the targets. And that seems a kind of a further step which doesn't yet been fully worked out. And a very helpful way of thinking about that came from Gus O'Donnell in the FT very recently. We wish we'd thought of this, and we wish he'd quoted it sooner. We could have certainly put it in the book. In the context of COVID again and getting out of COVID, Gus O'Donnell writes about the use of a kind of well-being agenda, a wider set of tools than just economic progress. The practical tools exist. Of course, measurement's hard, but roughly measuring the right concepts is a better way to make policy choices than using more precise measures of the wrong concepts. Coming from a former head of the civil service and the UK Cabinet Secretary, that I think shows great insights into how policy making should take place rather than necessarily how it has been taking place up to now. Making policy changes is for sure instrumental in changing lives, or at least we hope it is. And we put stress in the book that kind of policy and politics are intertwined, both involved in changing lives. We talk in the book about the policy process a lot, and it's often presented as this is the formal way in which policy is defined and produced and delivered in UK government. This strange acronym ROMAF, to look at the rationale, the objectives, the appraisal, so the rationale for change, the objectives, to appraise the options, to then implement it and monitor the implementation, to evaluate how it worked, to get some feedback on that, and to necessarily start again. The chart is usually shown just as this circle. We've added where at least two political decision points come in. The whole decision to proceed is invariably a political decision, as is the political decision about which choices to make in terms of, after the appraisal of options has been done, which one to go forward with. And you'll have seen this much debated as we've been going through COVID, with advice coming from scientific committees being considered, and essentially political decisions being made. So the evidence, these are decisions about policy informed by evidence, including official statistics, but not precisely based on evidence. We have a quote in the book, which is that the reality of policy decision making is that the timing of when political judgments need to be made cannot always wait on full availability of evidence. That's actually only part of the kind of political issues here. It's not just a matter of the timing and waiting for the evidence. It's much more about kind of all of the things that happens when we make decisions. The novelist David Lodge has one of his characters display what he calls a rather old-fashioned Enlightenment faith in the perfectibility of society through the application of science. But actually, it's not that straightforward, is it? As we all know. Even David Hume, a titan in the Scottish Enlightenment, displayed what one of his biographers called a stunning diminution of the role that reason plays in human life, matched by a greater expansion of the roles played by the custom, habit, passion, and the imagination. And if David Hume was subject to such balancing, I'm pretty sure that policymakers and particularly politicians, as well as the rest of us, are equally swayed to kind of work out where the balance lies in making a decision. In the book, we look about kind of, well, okay, if we want to change our lives, what's the kind of theories of change behind that? And there's no one big theory of change. Here are some interesting ideas. I mean, if we look instead beyond policy into everyday life, how are individuals going to change their everyday life? If we start on the right, in the blue corner, as it were, Michie at Oxford, Professor Michie at Oxford University, has written a lot about this and can summarise his work. There are three main influences on behaviour. We live in market economies, and in the main, markets influence that behaviour. What's available, what's the price of goods, things like that, the attractiveness of goods. Regulation can influence our behaviour, which is why governments pass laws and make regulations, but generally the kind of the culture we live in also kind of influences our behaviour to some degree. This is all very rather abstract stuff. We can't specify the strengths to which these things apply, but I think the point that we want to make in the book, that official statistics nevertheless play a role somehow in helping shape all of these three areas. It's just intriguing that we don't really know how that happens. In the red corner here is what I call the third sector approach, which is what a number of voluntary organisations adopt when they seek to kind of change attitudes and change behaviours. They think that people should know about it, they should care about it, and then they should do something about it. And working through those phrases again, need information, need evidence, including official statistics. We discuss in the book all the challenges of kind of getting better statistics into public policy and wider awareness. I don't want to kind of go into lots of detail here. In fact, I'd like to kind of skip across all of the detail, all the wider audiences and how we address those. Just to pause to say that we did suggest 4 broad ways that statistics can be used to yield beneficial change. Again, these are kind of broad conclusions, broad factors. They can be about improving national and local debates. They can be used to help build a national debate, bringing a new topic in. And on the converse to that is that actually official statistics, or the lack of them, leads to kind of exploring what does it mean when something is not included in a set of nations, in a nation's set of official statistics. And finally, the fourth area is around kind of helping to drive behaviour change in enacted policies. Those are kind of, again, broad concepts, broad issues. There's some evidence for these sorts of things happening, but it's still a kind of very much an unexplored and undeveloped area. So let's kind of, interest of time, I just want to kind of jump to our conclusions really, and kind of share those with you, which were our headline conclusion really is that kind of despite all the innovations in official statistics, and there are many, and in new sources of data which are coming on stream all the time, we conclude that, as the RSS wanted, a world with data at the heart of understanding society and decision-making is not yet fully realised. There's more to be done to maximise the public value of official statistics in particular, even though many people are working on this, including the United Nations, ECE and others.
Excuse me, Paul. We can't see any slides changing at the moment.
No, we're still on the theories of change, but I'll move on.
Right.
I'll change the slide now. There we are. Just to thanks, Phil. Sorry. So I hadn't prepared slides to cover those points. I just wanted to kind of give you a flavour of those. Our conclusions were 5 really about standards, going beyond technical quality, earning trust. Getting more involved with the kind of the competitive environment for official statistics, and the way in which official statistics are treated and understood. And one of the kind of one of the proposals that we come out with, it's not an original proposal. We're very grateful to others who've come out with this idea. Is that we should go back to the words in the United Nations Fundamental Principles and look at this idea of public statistics or public information, which would focus on the topics and uses covered by the principles, not on the specific set of statistics that are defined to be official statistics. So that would mean that these are produced not only by existing national statistics organisations and other statistical agencies, but by other organisations which can crucially share and demonstrate commitment to the principles of official statistics. And there's a toe in the water here in the UK with the voluntary application of the UK Code as overseen by the Office for Statistics Regulation. But very much part of this has to deliver high, certainly much higher levels of user and potential user engagement than at the moment. And the case for this model, of a kind of wider model of official or public statistics, can be made on the grounds of principle that improving public confidence. It's important to kind of improve public confidence in the numbers that underpin how we live our lives. The point is that it's the numbers that are essential for society to function, not that the providers of this essentially public service are themselves necessarily part of the public sector. So we suggest it's more important to be able to assess whether or not to trust the figures as you come across them, rather than, if you want to get a particular set of figures, go to a limited number of outputs to get them. And I think, that putting that into practice is, of course, a huge task. The first thing is to kind of see whether people buy into that and can start to begin to deliver that. Steve McGeely and Nastava proposed something very like this in delivering indicators to support the SDGs. Official statistics switch from a purely production or manufacturing-based model to a mixed business model, combining the manufacture of official statistics with the franchising of production under license. I think we'd argue that some form of accreditation is needed, so the franchising would involve that, based on existing codes of practice for official statistics. The point is to help identify reliable and trustworthy sources of relevant information to meet user needs. And what's crucial is that the national stats offices provide kind of leadership of public statistics, and a new role in kind of championing public statistics, providing good practice and perhaps actually leading the regular national conversations about changing needs for public statistics. I'm very conscious a lot of what I said has been a lot of hand waving and very broad. I wanted to finish just with a couple of slides. The first slide is just to look at a very topical COVID example, because you'll all have seen the statistics. Those in the UK will have seen the statistics that pop up every day about COVID, and invariably the first one looks like this. This is from the official government website, data.gov.uk, and it's a slide, a chart of the number of cases of COVID that happen day by day from the very start through to where we are now. It's administrative data. The vertical lines are the number of cases that are recorded, and the continuous line is a rolling average of that. And of course, these administrative data only rely on the fact that there are cases taking place. So it looks from this chart as if the second wave, as it's called, is much, much bigger than the first wave. We all know it isn't. Sometimes when the BBC and others present this chart, they put a dotted line down here somewhere, and they say before here there was limited testing, and in this half of the chart there was mass testing available. But even that's a kind of simplification, because mass testing didn't come in overnight everywhere. So, I mean, as an estimate of the incidence of COVID in the UK and how that's changed over time, this chart is really telling us very little. It's telling us very important information about the administrative processes to help track COVID. But I think that it would be really much better if, instead of just having individual charts like this, the COVID, the occurrence and the development of COVID was presented in a more kind of coherent and analytical way, involving not only the administrative data but statistical data on the incidence rate. I know in the UK that's only been measured from a survey from around about the second part of the chart onwards, but there are other data on deaths, for example, on hospitalisation, all of which would help to build a more complete picture about what happened in the first part of 2020 and what's happening now. So that was just one example that I just wanted to kind of share with you. My final slide then is kind of just to try and draw some sort of conclusion. It's not a conclusion, it's really kind of onward discussion. I hope you recognise the vision for official statistics to make a significant contribution to society, but a kind of a number of other issues around, is the current model actually sustainable in the current information phase, or do you buy into the new model that we and others have been starting to discuss? If so, how on earth do we do that? We're not suggesting that everything stops to kind of move to a new model. How to kind of evolve, migrate to that, and how do we kind of have a better debate informed by public statistics on the major changes that may well be necessary in our societies and our economies? Can we change statistics and change lives? Can we move the focus away from GDP and onto a broader set of sustainable well-being measures, which actually relate to the things that matter to us and the things that are going to make a difference? Final words in the book were that we trust that the issues we have raised will be discussed, considered and applied, ensuring that we all have and use the reliable information we need, drawing on the ever-changing data landscape. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much, Paul, for an very interesting and thought-provoking set of slides. I see Denise Leasley has already posted a question. Could you say something, Paul? Denise asked about the tension between the independence of statistics and the policy relevance side.
Yes, thank you, Denise. That's official statisticians often find themselves in a difficult place, it seems to me, because they both have to serve their policy masters. Here in the UK, we have the Government Statistical Service, as it's called, which is kind of includes the ONS, but it's statisticians in government departments, and they clearly have a very important role to serve as the government's statistical service. But it's not exclusively the government statistical service. I think what we tried here in the UK for decades now is to run with both of those, playing both of those roles, to be independent of the implications, the outcomes of the decisions that politicians, the government makes on the basis of the statistics, and to provide both to government and policymakers and to people outside the same set of statistics, so that people can kind of assess the decisions and the judgments that are made, but without kind of having different sets of data. Hugely difficult post. I see independence in the sense as independence from the political process. Maybe that's a naive assumption. I don't know what you, Denise, and others make of that challenge that you've said. Matthew's
had a follow-up thought. How would you expect users then to make sense of multiple and possibly conflicting estimates? And what's the role of official statisticians in helping them to do it? I suppose, especially since official statisticians may well producing some of those very estimates which conflict with what users get from elsewhere.
Absolutely. There's a cry always, isn't there, for kind of more analysis, and I think that again, perhaps rather simplistically, but that would at least be a good starting point, to recognise the that there are differences, and where possible to explain those. Might be a pie in the sky idea to do that. The timing. The timing alone doesn't help with that. We live in an age where information is coming out all of the time. It appears to be drip fed. People say, should I do this? Should I do that? The evidence seems to be changing. That's reality, I think, of how information comes out. Doesn't make it right, but there are things that we can do to recognise that's how it operates. Again, I'd welcome other people's thoughts on that.
We've got a question from Saria Safazadeh. Can you comment on the GDP measure recently published by Carnegie? Do you think it would be widely used? That's GD, capital W, little e. But
yes. I don't know that measure in detail. I haven't got to grips with that, but I can make a kind of more general point, which is, without being rude to Carnegie, because they've done some great work in the past. Do we need another measure? I think the point of having a number of new measures over the past, Social Progress Index comes to mind, and many others, in a sense, alerts people to the fact that there's a real problem with GDP. But in a sense, we sort of know that, don't we? And isn't it better to actually, to come back to think what Gus O'Donnell was saying, and actually try and let's agree on some roughly appropriate, better measure than GDP, and see if we can kind of go forward on that, rather than let's have a new measure. There will be many places where we do need new measure. The Social Metrics Commission, for example, recently pointed to the poor state of poverty measures here or the declining state of poverty measures in the UK. So I'm not ruling out new measures totally, but I just want to kind of try and shift the balance between kind of using the existing measures, even if they're not perfect, to constantly inventing new measures.
Sorry has posted to say that she's extremely happy to hear that. There's lots of metrics already out there, she says. It crosses my mind that the French government did something a little while ago, didn't they? They had a conference about not quite the gross national happiness index of Nepal, but a new measure.
And it's great that such conferences and events and conversations, national and specific, take place. I mean, the Stiglitz and Fitoussi Commission produced a lot of work a few years ago now, and one of the things they wanted was the kind of individual countries to take those discussions further forward. France, of course, formally commissioned Stiglitz and his colleagues, and it was President Sarkozy who then wanted to kind of take that forward and committed to raising the issues with European colleagues and in European meetings, as well as within France. Again, the point about kind of conferences are absolutely great. What do they lead to? What's the action? What's going to happen? How do we follow through on these?
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Paul. Ian has asked, Ian Plewis has asked whether you could say something about making raw data available for reanalysis and how NSSs in low and middle income countries might approach this.
I'm very happy to say a bit about it, but I'm not an expert in this area. But I think there are some points of principle which I think people are exploring here in the UK. I'm sorry, I'm not so aware of what's happening in other countries on this. I mean, I think the point is that there's increasing appetite for data or data as well as statistics. But of course, there's a long tradition of trying to meet those needs for statistical and research purposes by supplying certain people with access to anonymized data which don't reveal the names or the addresses of individual businesses or firms. But I think the problem seems to be, in a sense, a balance between not being disclosive and not actually providing very much information, or providing limited information or data which becomes more restricted over time. I mean, the UK has got a great tradition of making data available through the archives, Denise will know, and other places now, the Secure Research Service of the ONS. But, and it's a big but, a lot of users and potential users say, it doesn't really kind of cope with my needs. I can't get in there. It takes a long time. Things change. My research program, my policy work comes and goes before I manage to get authorization to do it. So, the question I think to be debated here, and I guess elsewhere, is how do you balance privacy, because that's what it comes down to, with having greater access to the data, and hopefully that will be non-disclosive data. I do just wonder whether we are just a bit too concerned about the potential for disclosure in this country. But I do understand the risks of damage to the statistical system and to data providers if the public lose trust in people who are holding that data.
Yes, and that links into something Paddy Brock has posted. A couple of Paddy says you'll be pleased to know that the ONS is now up to 81% of the SDG indicators from the UK National Reporting Platform.
Okay, good, thanks.
Very interesting point, Paddy says, on the CSOs et al. Reporting SDG data, e.g. through a voluntary application of the Code of Practice. Do many third sector organisations have the capacity and capability to do this? And Paddy thinks the RSS statistician pro bono volunteer scheme seems a great way to help, but should and could UK official statistics bodies do more?
I think that's a great question. I think it fits with my idea that we should be looking for NSOs to do more outreach like that. I realise there might be resourcing issues, but perhaps sometimes that means hard choices being made about what they're not doing that would free up resources for them to do this work. And I think also we need to think about, are we looking for every paragraph and subparagraph in the Code of Practice to be signed up to on every occasion? I think we need to make sure that this is fit for purpose. You'll have gathered, Paddy and others, that this is, we're throwing out here a kind of fairly broad and high level suggestion. Lots of practicalities to be worked through.
Interesting. Paddy's second question ties into something Andrea posted earlier. Andrea says, what are your thoughts on whether measurement of well-being would be context dependent? So would you be able to make country-to-country comparisons? Paddy's saying the same thing about, is there a UK-specific challenge on the coherence of the approach, e.g. between the Wellbeing of Wales report and Scotland's National Performance Framework?
Yeah, I am very conscious that this, and I've kind of gone round the circle on this one quite a few times. I think I come to the position that at heart, well-being does come down to well-being of the place or the nation or the group that you're looking at, and how they define it and what's important to them. In which case, it would appear that international, cross-national comparisons would be more difficult, if not impossible. But actually, when you do look into these things, I think there's quite a lot of research to suggest that actually, no matter where you are, the same kind of things do matter at heart. If you go to the kind of broader measures, I'm not just thinking of kind of Maslow's conceptualization of this, but other people as well have kind of pointed down to that there would be a common understanding of the things that are at the heart of well-being. Now this does lead to the possibility that, in a sense, you get two sets of measures or two sets of answers for a particular country. You get the one that's actually on its own national definition, and you get the one which is in some sense harmonized, or the core to compare with others. Sometimes glibly say, well, we should have to get to be a little bit more capable and willing to cope with that level of complexity. Easy to say that when you're kind of putting together a newspaper or online report. You kind of often don't have the time to reduce, as is apparent from the reporting of the COVID statistics. So I'm in great danger of kind of looking for a solution which is almost impossible to deliver. But I do recognise that it's a clear issue.
Okay, Denise has pointed out in reply to an earlier question that in the USA, academic researchers can be seconded or spend sabbaticals to government statistical agencies to assist with methodology and analysis, which is funded by the ASA and the NSF. So that's in passing. Tony Lawrence would like to say a little bit more about the collection and accuracy aspect of data.
Okay. That's a huge topic, Tony, and I don't necessarily have a very easy, off the top of my head, answer to this. I think the crucial things are a bit more transparency, probably, trying to understand what the collection processes are, what the sources of data are, why things were collected, how they were collected. And then, if those data have been processed into statistics, what can we say about the accuracy of them? Accuracy, I don't know what people's thoughts are on this, but it seems to me that accuracy of statistics tends not to be much discussed. Statistics are often treated as if they are items of accounting, and that's the answer. The unemployment rate is whatever it is, 3 point whatever. The average well-being score is, GDP is whatever the GDP rises. If you look behind the scenes, some of these statistics do have error measurements, do have bounds of confidence around them. I think there's a lot of work to be done in the statistical literacy field, which is to kind of try and raise awareness of uncertainties around any quoted statistic, and to be able to ask questions about the source of that. Big step to take, because there's a risk there that people will say, but if it's not an accurate number, or not a precise number, I can't really have trust in it. And that needs gently probing, because many of the things that we deal with in our everyday lives are not accurate or precise numbers. We just assume that they are. It's a huge topic. One clearly to be considered more by people better able to talk about these things than I am, I'm afraid.
Right, well, I think our time is drawing to a close, everybody. That's been an extremely interesting question and answer session, as well as an extremely interesting talk from Paul. I do wonder if we'll see in the end a single figure to replace GDP. People have been clearly looking for it for the last 60 years, but GDP is still hanging around.
Yeah.
People may not, as Paul said, it looks simple to the outsider because they see it as a single figure, but they don't realize all the paddling that's going on under the surface, and it's hanging around now like a familiar coat. Will there ever be something simple we can latch onto? But anyway, with that, I'll close this morning's session with our thanks to Paul on your behalf. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, everybody. Bye.